Imagine two people, same city, same job, same salary on day one. They save the same percentage of every paycheck, make no obvious mistakes, and work just as hard. By the time they reach their 60s, one of them is comfortable, maybe even wealthy. The other is anxious, underprepared, and wondering what they did wrong. The difference between them isn't discipline, it isn't intelligence. It's the year they were born. The economy you're born into, the interest rates, the housing prices, the pension systems. Those forces shape your financial life more powerfully than almost any individual choice you'll ever make. This isn't a story about excuses, it's a story about timing, and once you see it clearly, you can never quite unsee it. Let's go back to 1982. Our first character, call him Robert, is 25 years old, fresh out of college, no student debt to speak of, and just landed his first real job. The economy is rough right now, but something extraordinary is about to happen. Robert opens a savings account. The bank offers him 12% annual interest. That means his savings literally double roughly every 6 years without him lifting a finger. He doesn't need to understand the stock market. The bank is doing the heavy lifting for him. Now meet Maya. She's 25 in 2013. Same city, same job title, same starting salary when you adjust for inflation. She opens a savings account too. Her interest rate, 0.1%. A $10,000 deposit earns her $10 a year. For Robert, that same deposit earned $1,200 a year. That gap, that quiet, invisible gap, is where generational wealth begins to diverge. Not in a dramatic crash or a lucky windfall. In the interest rate printed on a savings account on an ordinary Tuesday. But savings accounts are just the beginning. Let's talk about where most people actually build wealth: their home. In 1980, the median American home cost roughly 3 times the median household income. Stretch, maybe, but reachable. A normal aspiration for a normal life. By 2023, that same ratio had more than doubled. The median home now costs over 7 times the median household income. The house didn't just get more expensive in raw dollars, it got harder to afford relative to what people actually earn. The ladder didn't get taller. The first rung moved up. And then came the pandemic years. Between 2020 and 2023 alone, home prices surged 45% nationally, the fastest 3-year spike ever recorded. People who already owned homes saw their net worth explode. People who didn't own homes watched the door slam shut. Robert bought his first home in 1985. He locked in a mortgage, a long-term loan secured against the property, at a rate that was high by modern standards but falling fast. Over the next 2 decades, rates dropped and his home value climbed. His single largest purchase turned into his single greatest financial asset. Maya tried to buy in 2021, the moment everyone thought was finally her chance. Prices had been rising for years, but rates were near record lows. Then rates spiked. The monthly payment on a median home jumped by over $800 in less than 18 months. She's still renting. Now you might be thinking, what about stocks? If you can't afford a house, just invest in the market, right? Except here too, the year you start matters enormously. And the way timing plays out in markets is even more invisible than in housing, because it looks like your own choices. Imagine you turned 30 in the year 2000. You had a decade of earnings behind you, you were finally starting to invest seriously, and you put your money into a broad index fund, a basket of stocks that mirrors the overall market, spreading your risk across hundreds of companies. Over the entire decade that followed, the S&P 500 delivered a total return of roughly -9%. Now imagine you turned 30 in 2009 instead. You entered the market right at the bottom of the financial crisis. By 2020, that same investment had grown by more than 400%. Same financial habit, completely different outcome. The calendar, not the character, not the And this is where it gets personal. Market timing doesn't just affect your investment account, it shapes your entire financial psychology. A generation that watched their first decade of investing go nowhere becomes cautious, maybe permanently scarred. A generation that watched 400% gains becomes confident, willing to take risk. Same people, different histories, different instincts. Let's talk about the paycheck itself. Because even before you save or invest anything, what you earn shapes everything downstream. And for most American workers over the past 4 decades, the paycheck told a quietly devastating story. Between 1979 and 2020, 4 decades, inflation adjusted wages for the median American worker grew by less than 10% in total. That's not 10% a year. That's 10% across 40 years. The economy grew, productivity grew, but for most workers, the paycheck barely moved in real terms. Meanwhile, the top 1% saw their real wages grow by 160% over the same period, the same 40 years, the same economy. Two completely different experiences of it, depending on where you stood in the income distribution. So, when we wonder why younger workers seem to be behind, why they have less saved, less equity, less cushion, part of the answer is simply this. They've been running on a treadmill that wasn't going anywhere, working hard, doing everything right, and yet the ground beneath them moved slower than it did for the generation ahead. And many millennials didn't just enter a stagnant wage environment. They entered it carrying something their parents never had to carry at anything like the same scale: student debt. This wasn't a minor headwind, it was a structural weight attached to the starting line. In 2003, total US student loan debt was around $250 billion. By 2023, it had surpassed 1.77 trillion. That's not a rounding error. That's a fundamental shift in how an entire generation enters adult financial life. Here's what debt does that's easy to underestimate. It doesn't just take money, it takes time. Every dollar going towards student loan interest is a dollar not going into a down payment fund. Every year spent paying down debt is a year of lost compound growth. Compound growth being the way your investment returns earn their own returns, multiplying your wealth over time. Research bears this out in a specific human way. Each $10,000 in student debt is associated with roughly a 1 to 2 percentage point drop in the likelihood that person will own a home. Multiply that across a generation carrying tens of thousands in loans, and you start to understand why homeownership rates among young adults fell to levels not seen since the 1960s. Now let's talk about something that feels abstract until you're 55, and suddenly it's the only thing that matters: your retirement. Because the system that funds retirement in America changed dramatically within a single generation, and most people didn't notice until it was too late. In 1979, if you worked for a mid-sized American company, there was roughly a 38% chance your employer offered a defined benefit pension. A defined benefit pension is exactly what it sounds like. Your employer promises you a defined, predictable monthly income in retirement, no matter how the markets perform. The risk sits with the company, not with you. By 2011, that coverage had dropped to under 15%. The pension didn't just fade, it was replaced by the 401k, which shifts the investment risk entirely onto the worker. Now you have to decide how much to contribute, where to invest, and hope the market cooperates when you need to start withdrawing. For Gen X workers, those born roughly between 1965 and 1980, the transition happened mid-career. They were too young to fully vest in the old system, too old to build a complete new one. Their median retirement savings in 2016 sat around $64,000, not enough to generate meaningful income, just a slow, grinding shortfall. And today, the median retirement account balance for Americans approaching retirement age is around $87,000. Financial planners typically suggest you need 10 to 12 times your annual salary saved by the time you stop working. For most Americans, that gap is not a rounding error. It's the difference between dignity and dependence. So, what does all of this look like when you add it up? Lower interest on savings, higher home prices relative to income, a stock market that rewarded you or punished you based on your birth year, stagnant wages, student debt, a vanished pension. Each of these forces is real. Together, they compound into something that shapes a life. In 2019, millennials, then between the ages of 23 and 38, held roughly 4% of all US wealth. When boomers were that same age, they held 21%, not because millennials are irresponsible, because they entered a fundamentally different system. By 2022, the median millennial household had a net worth of around $127,000. The median boomer household, around $409,000, nearly a 1 to 3 ratio, even though the younger generation has been told their entire lives that hard work and discipline are enough. Now, and this is important, none of this means the game is over. Knowing the terrain is different from being trapped by it. The person who understands these structural headwinds can make different choices, choosing assets that outpace wage growth, starting retirement contributions earlier, and refusing to measure themselves against a boomer timeline that no longer applies. Because here's the thing about timing, it cuts both ways. Boomers who bought homes in the 80s benefited from falling rates and rising prices, but the same boomers who relied on pensions watched those promises quietly erode. Gen X got squeezed between systems, but those who invested through the long bull market from 2009 onward recovered. Every era has its tailwinds and its traps. Millennials and Gen Z hold one advantage no previous generation had at this stage. They can see the structural picture more clearly than any generation before them. They've watched the data emerge in real time. They know the home price ratio. They understand compound interest, painfully from the student debt side, but that knowledge runs in both directions. The challenge isn't awareness. It's the gap between knowing and being able to act. Because when every dollar is already stretched, the advice to invest more feels like a cruelty. That tension is real. It deserves to be named, not papered over with slogans about cutting out lattes. But so does this. The single most powerful financial tool available to anyone at any age is time in the market. Not timing the market, not trying to buy low and sell high, but simply being present in it, consistently, even in small amounts. The generation that starts early, even with less, has a genuine structural advantage over the generation that starts late, even with more. Which brings us back to Robert and Maya, our two characters from the beginning. Same habits, same city, same drive. Robert didn't build wealth because he was smarter or more disciplined. He built it because interest rates were high when he saved, housing was affordable when he bought, pensions existed when he worked, and the stock market ran upward for most of his investing life. Maya isn't behind because she failed. She's navigating a fundamentally different set of conditions. Lower wage growth, higher asset prices, vanished pension guarantees, and a decade of near-zero returns on safe savings. She has to run faster just to reach the same starting line. That is the core truth this video has been building toward. Identical financial behavior produces radically different outcomes depending on the economic era you inhabit. It's not fair. It's not a design flaw that's about to be fixed. It's the structure of the system. And seeing it clearly is the only honest place to begin. Maya knows the terrain now. That's not nothing. That's everything.